Andrew Markell here with Justin Wiedemann from Summit Racing, and today we're talking about lowering and lifting vehicles. Today's live stream is sponsored by Summit Racing, and it's going to be a very interesting topic, I think.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. You know, whether you're jacking it up to the sky or slamming it on the ground, you know, you can adjust your suspension for how you feel about your vehicle. It's really kind of a symbol of what's an expression through your vehicle in all the different modifications you can do from, you know, wheels, tires, lights, paint, all this kind of fun stuff. One of the base modifications a lot of people do is a suspension modification. Whether you have a pickup truck and you're jacking the thing up to put a more aggressive wheel and tire on it, or if you have a car and you're lowering it for a little bit better stance, you know, tuck some big wheels under there and really kind of just define how your car looks. But there's a lot more to it than just simply putting on a spring. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what you need to know about lifting or lowering.
Yeah, you're right. It's strictly aesthetics in some cases, just because it's very hard to really lower the suspension on the vehicle and get, you know, lower the center of gravity, which improves handling, and then also increasing spring rates to help improve the handling too. So it really has to be a nice balance between the springs and maybe even some of the sway bars.
Yeah, there is a recipe that you kind of need to follow a little bit. It's not just bolting on a bunch of random parts and hoping for the best. You need to do a little bit of research, maybe talk to some other people with the same platform that you have. And that's like the great part about the internet we have nowadays is you have this massive information resource to know what everybody else is running and, you know, might what work on your ride the best. Because you don't want to spend a bunch of time bolting on a bunch of different parts and seeing what works best and what doesn't, when there's probably somebody already that's figured it out.
Yeah, because, you know, it's strictly, in some cases, aesthetic. And, you know, we pull up this one thing called the shoe test. And actually, if you could pull up one of the shoe test slides that I had there, where if you could fit your shoe between the tire and the wheel well at top, you know, that means that you're properly stanced the vehicle. But there's actually a different shoe test for some of the off-road folks with a lift kit. And pull up that other shoe test photo.
That one's more my speed. I like that one a lot better. You know, you can't, if you're lifting a truck, you know, you can't have enough wheel gap. So
that's true. With this, you know, the change in the suspension, the ride height, the relationship with the wheel to the road, how does that affect the camber, caster, and even toe on some vehicles?
So when you lower a vehicle aggressively, you know, you're going to lose some suspension travel in it because essentially what you're doing is you're taking a strut and you're putting a lower, you know, a lot of cars are strut cars. So most modern cars use a strut and just not a coil spring and a shock in the front anymore. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to putting a shorter coil on your deal, and that's going to lower the car a lot. But you still have to carry all that weight, so that shorter coil might have a more aggressive wind or something like that. The downside of that is like Andrew said, it's going to affect your camber, caster, and toe. So you not only need to readjust it, but by lowering the car, you're going to limit some of those things. So you're going to lose a lot of I shouldn't say a lot, but you might lose some suspension travel, you might lose some adjustment, and it's a balance on getting the car as low as you can, but it's still maintaining good angles and being safe. Because if you don't maintain that stuff, you can make your automobile very unsafe to drive and very scary.
For camber, when a vehicle is lowered, the camber goes more negative. And when it's lifted, it goes more positive. What can a technician do to cure that issue so there's not premature tire wear?
So they have a couple different things. Obviously, getting in alignment and adjusting your camber adjustment. So it's kind of cool how they work because it's a bolt it'll have like a large circle on it, but the bolt is not in the center like a regular washer. It's actually offset to one side. So as you turn that's actually going to move the control arm in or out slightly to help correct the angle.
Ashley, could you pull up the picture of the camber bolt? Right there.
Yeah, so as you can see, the hole's not perfectly through the center of the circle, and by moving that, and on your frame of your vehicle itself or your subframe, there's going to be two little tabs that are welded there that bolt actually rides inside. So that's going to be your adjustment. It's kind of, they even put degrees on the end of some of them, so if you have some numbers, like some factory specs, you can kind of adjust it a little bit and get it to where you can drive it to the alignment shot. But there's nothing quite like an alignment rack is going to get you the best answer. Doing an alignment by hand and all that kind of stuff, you don't really have a good measure on it. So the other thing you can do is a lot of guys is they actually have camber adjustment plates that the top of the strut mounts to that goes in the top of your strut towers. And that's a big modification for a lot of guys. I shouldn't say big, but like a base modification. That's something you're going to do right off the back when you're lowering your vehicle.
And let's pull up actually the picture of the camber plate. I think this is a Longacre one. And that can give you quite a bit of camber adjustment, probably even more than probably plus or minus 3 degrees.
Oh yeah, so that's going to be a very, very large adjustment, or it's going to give you a larger range of adjustment, I should say. So that's going to bolt in the top of your strut tower, and then as you can see, kind of, your factory, where your factory strut would bolt in, what you're going to do with those 4 bolts on the top around that piece with the bushing, that's where it's actually going to move, and you're going to get your camber adjustment. So, and you can see like those Longacre ones are really nice. There is some like very bootleg models that you can pick up on the internet, but I recommend when it comes to suspension components that you're spending a little bit of, you're going to get what you pay for. So if you cheap out on stuff, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be kind of some cheap parts. But, if you head over to Summit Racing, where we sell nothing but quality car parts, we're going to be able to hook you up and get you something that's going to fit your car right and really give you what you need. And we carry a full selection of springs, camber plates, kind of anything you can think of in the suspension world for anything you drive. So it's really cool.
And it's pretty amazing with those camber plates, looking at those. If you think on a strut suspension, that's essentially a ball joint on the vehicle. And making sure that you have something that's safe and reliable, can take a lot of G-force. It's great. But as far as a former alignment technician, I would absolutely love to see these on most cars. If it was possible.
It would really make, if they just put these on from the factory, it would make technicians' jobs a whole lot easier.
Because you can just get it so close to the spec that you want.
Yeah, and that's another thing. So you see a lot of guys when lifting pickup trucks, and I'm actually going to use Jeeps as a example. Really common on like TJs and with Dana 30s is there's not a whole lot, you don't really have camber adjustment in the front. So they do what they call an offset ball joint. And that ball joint basically is offset in the socket so you can adjust your camber and caster by where you position that ball joint. So, if it's all the way to one side, it's going to be out like this, and then versus going to the other way, it's going to be towed in, or I should say, that's not towed in. I used the wrong term there.
Positive toe, negative toe.
Yeah, you're gonna have a bunch of negative on it. So that's a cool part in a vehicle where you don't have a camber adjustment, where you can gain some. And even like on the old Ford trucks with the twin I-beam suspension, you never really, on the newer 90s models, you see right there on the arm itself, they, in big letters, do not heat and bend. On the old trucks, that was the solution. Is you got that thing nice and hot with a torch, and just kind of, you tweaked it until you got it to where you wanted it. And there was that was the unfortunate part about that, is you put a bunch of weight in the bed and it kind of just messed up, or a trailer on it, and it threw the whole thing out of jabroni and just kind of made it less than ideal to drive.
You brought up another angle, caster. When lifting or lowering a vehicle, how can the caster change? And how can it affect the steering feel?
So when caster changes, essentially you're moving where the tire contacts the road. You're moving it back or forward on the. So if you drew a straight line down like you had a circle, you drew a straight line down it. By moving that, you're moving where the wheel touches off that straight line. So by moving it back, the steering's going to get a lot more faster and aggressive, and things. It's going to be scary. It's going to be scary to drive. The steering's going to be quick to react. The downs, into a cornering and that kind of be great, but like I said, it'll get away from you a little bit, and you won't be having a good time, because steering back out of it, it's going to steer slow. Yeah. So that's kind of you want to find the balance there of fast in steer and slow out steer, and that's race car stuff. But I wish I knew a little bit more about that subject and could really get into the nitty gritty and touch on it. But that's race car stuff, and I'm not. It's a little above me.
The drift crowd, they really do a interesting thing with caster. So they make sure the struts are back like this, and then they increase the length of the steering arm on the knuckle to get a little bit more of the steering movement, included angle, and it just really blows me away what those guys can do with the suspension, just to make it more trackable when you're going sideways.
Yeah, and it's nuts to watch, like I said, and how you're setting up a road race car versus like a drift car. And some of those drift guys with the steering angle on those things is insane, just to see how, it almost looks like it's like a Photoshop picture of how much steering angle they're actually getting out of these cars.
But the Carolina squat.
Oh, the Carolina squat.
And what that must do to the caster on a vehicle to make it, that would be pretty tough to drive sometimes.
Yeah, so if you guys don't know what we're talking about, there's a really, really popular trend in the Carolina is just kind of where it started and got its name. But it's guys lifting their pickup trucks only in the front and then lowering the back. So you get this very exaggerated angle, and it's actually extremely dangerous and less than ideal, because not only can you not see over your hood, but it changes how the truck, how the thing handles. So, like I said earlier, by moving that contact patch back on the tire, the thing is going to steer all wonky, and it's going to steer really fast. Like it's going to be right now. You'll be like, oh, I'm just going to go around this corner. I only turn the wheel a little bit. Well, the truck is turning a lot more than that. So you might be hitting a lot more curbs and that kind of stuff, but it's less than ideal. When you lift a truck, lifting the whole thing is kind of what you want to do for safety.
But on the lowering side, looking at how some of the kits I've noticed from Summit Racing, you'll see like 2-inch drop, 2.5-inch drop in the rear. Will some of the screen manufacturers sort of do like a custom type for, depending on the vehicle, for the look at the stance, like an Eibach or an H&R?
Yeah, so that's a cool thing about like with Eibachs and companies like that is not only do they make, they kind of suggest a spring kit where you want to start, but they make a spring everywhere in between as well. So if you need to, want to adjust your stance a little bit or that kind of, you don't quite like the way your kit looks, you simply can get a different spring setup or a different block setup or drop shackles if you have a leaf spring vehicle in the back, and adjust it that way. So it's when lowering a vehicle, it's very, very customizable to what you want your look to be, or if you're trying to fit like a larger wheel and tire package, that's a beautiful thing about customization is you can change everything.
True, and I look at a couple different vehicles that I have, and I've lowered 2 of them, and it's amazing what that can do for the look of the vehicle. With tow, for example, once you start to compress the suspension, or it's being lifted, will that change the tow angle as far as affecting bump steer or other things that can happen with it?
So yeah, so if you're when you're cycling through the suspension, wherever it's kind of big in correlation, we're going to use a rack and pinion vehicle, for example. So wherever your rack is mounted, ideally when it's at ride height, you want your tie rod to be flat. So as the suspension lifts up, it's going to pick, your tie rods are drooping, and it's going to pick, and it's going to kind of stick it out a little more. Versus when you compress it, it's going to come. It's weird. It's weird how it works, and that's very important if you're doing like a custom front end setup, or that you're swapping. A very, very popular thing is now guys are actually using the Crown Vic front suspension and swapping that into a bunch of stuff. And before that, it was Mustang 2. So guys would cut Mustang 2 front ends out and put it under absolutely anything from S10s to big Detroit iron cars. That's a really, really solid suspension setup, and there's a ton of aftermarket support for it. And the Crown Vic front suspension is kind of just took place of the Mustang 2 stuff, and it's got really, really popular. It's kind of like for GM guys, it's tall spindle B-body GM stuff. Yep. That is that's the holy grail and the best of suspension when it comes to the GM components in old iron.
You're bringing up old iron before. Some of the kids out there in the audience, sorry about that, guys, may not be familiar with lowering knuckles and spindles. Are those still available for depending on the application?
Oh yeah, so drop spindles are just as popular as they were before, and basically, when we talk about a drop spindle, it's moving where the spindle is from a stock position. So you'll hear say like a -2 drop spindle. So that's actually that spindle. So if this was your spindle, your factory spindle, you have your factory spud here. That's actually it's lowered in the you've moved a location in where it was mounted from the factory. So that's going to lower. It's affected none of your suspension geometry. You've only lowered it at the outside. So that's kind of cool in the aspect of your suspension maintains, stock ride height and all that, and it's going to cycle properly how it should have from the factory, versus just putting a lowering spring in it where you've just took it from stock ride height and you've lost a little bit of suspension travel because now at its ride height position, it's sitting a little lower.
And a question that just came in regards to, is it safe to use to cut a spring to lower a vehicle?
I'm going to say no. So in modern times, back in yesteryear, cutting springs that's what you had to do because nothing else was available. So with now and today in 2022, you can basically buy any spring you want. So you need to measure your factory spring, and there's a whole way to go about doing that between, total height, coil diameter, how large it is here at the top, and you can buy a spring that's going to fit anything. There's either a manufacturer like Epoch or, there's tons of manufacturers that make springs that someone's going to have something that's going to fit your application. So no, cutting a spring or heating it up with a torch so it loses its spring is not ideal. It's not safe, and you don't want to. Just thank me later and go buy springs. I promise.
I'd like to welcome Michael Craig from Walker County Center of Technology. He's an instructor there. Do we have them on the line yet? Hey guys, how's it going?
Wait.
Thanks for attending, guys. Awesome.
Yeah, nice to see all those smiling faces.
Thank you, Michael. So if you guys have any questions, please chime in. So the right way to do it, because vehicles nowadays have stability control, ABS, and everything else. Is there a package that some shops need to put together for a customer and not just piecemeal the replacement?
Yeah, so that's the cool thing about the automotive aftermarket is manufacturers seek out new and popular vehicles to essentially put kits together. So companies like Hellwig or like I said, I keep going back to Epoch, but Koenig's another great one that they'll sell a complete package. So some vehicles you're only going to get springs. Then there's companies that you're going to get a whole strut assembly. So that strut is not only has a lowering spring on it, but it has a tuned strut for your application, and it's usually going to be a more a performance oriented kind of deal. So between getting a strut, sway bar links, sway bars, that's going to be all kind of the basis of the sport suspension packages.
And even going a little bit further than that, the sway bar package can make a huge difference because that's more or less the third spring on an axle.
Oh yeah, a sway bar is a necessary piece in the performance car recipe. And going from a dinky stock sway bar that can say be as big as around as a quarter to a aftermarket performance sway bar that's as big as a 50-cent piece,
yeah,
that can make a huge difference. And if you've ever drove a vehicle that didn't have sway bar, had a broken sway bar link or the sway bar links weren't attached, you can tell going down the road on the big difference when it's not. A sway bar is very crucial and it does its job.
Well, even with a stiffer sway bar, you may be able to run a little bit of a softer spring for just strictly comfort.
Oh yeah.
The kits in general, and this is a question that just came through. If I do use lowering springs, do I need to replace the shocks or struts? And do I need to upgrade them to something else, or do I need adjustables?
So you can go down that road both ways. If you just get a lowering spring package where you're supposed to put an aftermarket spring on your factory strut, you can get away with it. There's a lot of there's a lot of open ends to that question. So it kind of depends on your vehicle's condition. Like if I have something that has 5,000 miles on it and I just bought springs for it, I don't want to replace my only 5,000 mile struts.
Yeah.
But say I picked up a project car like a mid-90s Civic, the thing's got 100,000 miles on it, and I'm going to have that off, well, you might as well put new struts on the car anyway because they're probably worn out. And a new strut can make a huge difference too because all a strut is you've combined your shock and your spring package into one convenient package.
Yep.
So you're not replacing, you know, when you go to replace springs on your shocks on your car, do you always put springs in it? No, but if you have a spring issue like a broken spring or the spring seems really wore out, it's probably a good idea to replace it. So, yeah, it's kind of like I said, there's a lot of ways you can go. If you're more budget-minded and you just kind of want to lower it and, you know, you're not trying to spend all the money at once, probably get away with a set of springs. But if you're there and you don't want to take it apart twice, putting replacing your shock and or strut is not a bad idea. And that's also something very important. If you're working in the garage and you're going to take a strut apart, you need proper tools. So either you need a strut compressor because a strut that's essentially, we always like to compare it to a loaded gun because it is dangerous. And if you try to take it apart without the proper tools, it can hurt you.
I think this one's from a Ford F-150, and it's quite considerable, the force it can put out.
Yeah, there's a lot of boom behind that spring, and it's important to respect it.
Question just came in from Facebook. Should you change the alignment specifications for camber, caster, and toe after you lower the vehicle, and how far off should they be from the original factory specs?
So that's going to vary as you lower the vehicle more. It's going to get off your factory specs more. So after you do any suspension modification, even putting on new wheel and tire, you should take it to the alignment shop and get it checked. And alignment's that's an important part of vehicle maintenance. So either you just can replace some upper control arms or something like that, or if you just have a strut car where it just has lowers on it. That's any suspension work or modification, it's important to check the alignment. So not only your tire wear is great and all that, but the thing handles properly and it's safe to drive down the road.
Is there any reason to do excessive camber on a vehicle?
It's a fad. It's a look thing. There's no performance. It's actually, in my opinion, it kind of decreases performance. So when you go into that crazy camber, less of the tire is going to touch on the road, and that's not really ideal. But it looks cool. So it doesn't do it for me, but there's a lot of guys where that's their, the JDM community. It's super, super popular, and it's a neat look. They tuck some cool wheels under those cars, and it kind of makes you scratch your head at a car show a little bit on how they got them things so wonked out.
So, new vehicles, as far as lift kits for those, let's say some of the latest Jeeps, the latest, 2018 and pretty much newer, what's out there for those owners?
So it depends a lot on what your suspension is. So say you want to go lift a new Bronco. Well, on the Bronco, it's got 4 struts around it. So the first lift kit is, a mild lift is just going to be a set of strut spacers. And that's simply a steel polyurethane. They use a bunch of different materials, and it looks like a big, in the past it was hockey guys used hockey pucks.
Yep.
And we don't recommend it. There's replacements for those now. But you just put a spacer on top of your strut, and it's just moving your strut down. So you're going to get, that's like a mild, like a level, they call lift-in level, where it'll be a strut spacer for the front and a small block for the back. Now, if you're going larger than about 3 to 3.5 inches, then you're going to get into total suspension systems. So where you'll have a drop assembly for the front of the truck, so it'll have a lowered carriage and that kind of deal. Big, giant, tall spindles, all to keep your suspension geometry where it needs to be.
So, okay, you've got a body lift. You got a suspension lift. Do you need to be concerned about the steering column and the steering system?
So that's just something important to pay attention to. So if you still have like a steering box, like a conventional steering box setup, drop steering arms is going to be one of the things that you're going to progress into. Now, usually 9 times out of 10 when you're doing a bunch of suspension modification, the steering box or steering rack is going to stay in the factory location. So with a steering box, it's more common where you're just going to keep putting a larger drop arm on it to keep your suspension geometry correct. On a truck that has a rack and pinion, eventually the rack and pinion is going to get moved down, and that's going to keep your suspension angle where it needs to be. Now on almost all modern vehicles, everything has a telescoping steering shaft though. So if you're moving anywhere in that kind of deal, you're just going to slide. It's just going to slide out more. But it's a good idea to pay attention to that because that's the last thing you want to do is for that thing to slide all the way out. I can't tell you how many vehicles people have brought me where they're like, yeah, I put a body lift on it or something like that. And when I slid it back together, the steering wheel's upside down and nothing on the steering wheel works anymore.
180 degrees out. I've done that a couple times.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us. It's a learning curve.
We just had a question come in regards to, Neil is wondering, what is the most you can use blocks on a leaf spring suspension to either lower or raise the suspension?
So there's a safety thing there. So I don't personally like 3-inch is kind of the largest I think is safely to go because you have to think of what you're doing when you're shoving a block under something. So you have your leaf spring, and then you have a block, and then your axle, and you have these big long U-bolts. So you've took the axle farther away from its mounting point, and it's just a big sandwich clamped in there. So the larger block you're shoving in there, the more potential it has for force to move back and forth this way. A super common thing on leaf spring vehicles, though, is you can either get a more aggressive leaf spring if you're lifting it, so the spring will be arched more itself, or if you're lowering the vehicle, to go to what they call a drop shackle. And actually going to move the shackle how the spring mounts in the shackle, and it's going to allow you to lower it more. So either the shackle is shorter, or if it just extends it more out past its mounting point, there's a couple different ways to skin that cat.
Just so you're not winding up that leaf spring with the extra long blocks on it. Another question just came in. As far as lowering heights on a vehicle, why do some of the kit manufacturers have different heights for the same vehicle? That was sort of a similar question from before. It's strictly on taste. I mean,
yeah, it's a customization thing. So you might not want your vehicle to be totally slammed and looked at aggressive. You still might daily drive the thing a lot. And say I'm going to use Subaru as an example because that's kind of fun. That's a different breed of people. So them guys not only do they like to have a cool looking car, but they might want to haul their bicycle around and do that kind of stuff. Maybe go over a slightly rough terrain. So you don't want the thing dragging and slammed on the ground to where it's not usable anymore. Yeah. But if that's all you're doing, it's your show car, that's what you want to go drive around and pull into parking lot sideways and do that kind of deal, then lowering it as most you can and using that most aggressive kit is going to be for you. But just like you said, Andrew, it's simply on taste and kind of how you're going to use your vehicle. So that's the beautiful part about customization is everybody gets to do it a little bit different. So,
question just came in. I'm going to use coilovers on my Honda suspension for a Civic. What tips do you have for setting up the ride height of the vehicle, and what tools should they be using?
So, I mean, one of the die-hard tools on that is going to be your tape measure, your straight steel, and it's going to let you kind of see where your car starts stock, put your parts on, and measure it and see how far you actually lowered the thing. Now, and that's another thing, kind of an accessory tool to lowering a vehicle, is sometimes when you lower a vehicle, you might start get some clearance issues and interference. So they have these cool tools called Fender rollers, and 16-year-old me would have got my Louisville Slugger out and would have jacked the car up a little and rolled fenders that way. But we actually sell a legit fender roller tool now that has a big urethane wheel on it, and you bolt it on to where your wheel would bolt on, and you can sit there and roll your fenders like that, just so you can get that desired wheel tuck, your shoe gap that you want. So, it's one of the base tools you're going to, and just like in any automotive thing, and you're unbolting struts, you're going to want basic good hand tools. So you might need a torque wrench, that kind of stuff. There's a whole slew of tools that you could need for that job that you might not have that might be worth researching a little bit to see what your project involved. But one of my favorite tools for any good automotive deal is a good torque wrench, because you want everything to be too tight, not too loose.
And my advice with the Fender roller is invest in a really good heat gun.
Yeah.
Because that's going to make a big difference in not destroying your paint. Because if you go with that Fender roller and the body's cold, it's going to crack the paint, and you're going to get it. You're going to knock down all that stuff around the wheel well, and it's eventually going to rust.
Yeah, that's you don't want to destroy your paint. So like Andrew said, grabbing a good heat gun, either from like. But we have if you head over to the Summit website, we have a whole awesome selection of from mild to wild heat guns for whatever you need. So Fender rollers as well. So if you're trying to take that project on, head over to the Summit Racing website and see what you need.
So, in general, what are some of the failure points of a badly assembled suspension for a vehicle that's either been lifted or lowered?
So the most common failure you usually see is a ball joint failure. Okay. Like that is the big one. Whether it be a A-arm vehicle, so on A-arm vehicles, it's usually the upper that goes first, because I'm going to use 9902 GM trucks as an example. They actually use a torsion bar suspension. They don't use a strut in the front. So you have torsion keys, and there's a whole big deal to that. So what happens a lot of times is people crank the key adjustment bolts in and they max out the suspension. So not only does the truck ride like a rock, but you've maxed out all your ball joint angles. So with a ball joint, it works a lot like your shoulder socket, and it's a ball inside like a half circle. So when you max out that angle, it's wearing one side of that socket on an extreme, and eventually it's going to fail. Either that the ball joint stud breaks off, or it straight pulls the ball out of the socket, and that's not a good time. And there's only a couple things. That's one less thing that you need to attach to the wheel, and it can cause an accident or kind of be even worse. You could total a truck.
Yeah.
So ball joints, bushings, it's going to be like a lot of the same wear components that you need to pay attention to in your vehicle. It's just you're using it in a more extreme fashion, so you need to pay a little bit better attention to it, and it's going to shrink your maintenance intervals slightly. So it's just a good thing is when you're doing oil changes, that kind of stuff, brakes, to pay attention to that stuff. Look for ripped boots or loose. Grab a pry bar, start checking suspension components, and that's a big thing. And checking over a front end and suspension health is. We could talk about that for 3 more hours. There's a lot that goes into that.
I mean, the thing with a lot of these really lowered vehicles, even by 2 inches or 1.5 inches, some of the import stuff, some of the toughest things to deal with is the CV joints, because either the tripod joint on the inside is being extended a little out, or it's getting compressed a little in, and also the CV joint is at a different angle, and that could wear out, an axle that could be have 100,000 miles on it and eventually fail with the lift suspension.
Yeah, and that's the last thing you want to do is, bust a roller in one of those tri-joints or bust an inner CV cage, because in a front-wheel drive car, if you have one broken axle, the thing's not going anywhere. So that's something important to pay attention to in overall health.
Hey, Michael, do you have any questions from your class? Well, if you have a question, just chime in here and we'll answer it for you. I guess the big question is the alignment of the camber. I know we've talked about camber before as being the optimal angle. How do you really judge that you're going to have a suspension that's going to be, let's say, economical? It's not grinding through tires for a customer.
Well, and that's just kind of, you need to pay attention where you're setting it. So you're going to look at your factory. If you're working on a car that has some aftermarket modifications, you're going to set your suspension knowing, look at the stock numbers and, try that first, see where it sits. If something looks out of whack, it's probably out of whack. So that's where a little experience and know-how and knowledge as a alignment guy is really going to benefit you. So, your green behind the ears, third day at the alignment shop guy is not going to be able to, he's going to have a tough time figuring out where it really needs to be. But the guy that's been doing it 20 years is going to have a pretty good handle on what needs to move and what needs to go where. And that's what's important kind of in this industry and kind of with tomorrow's technicians, is that the old guard is teaching the new guys all the tricks. Because you only can learn, you learn a lot in a classroom setting, but it's being the hands-on aspect and the knowledge of the old guys is really what's going to get you far in the industry. And it's important that we teach the young guys the tips and tricks of the trade, because they're eventually going to be teaching the whippersnappers of today, how to work on some of this stuff. So,
and some of the instructors out there, they had to deal with their own trends out there. You had the gasser look with the front end up. You had the big wheels in the back where you were putting a lot of blocks underneath just to give that right stance. And things never change except the taste, the look, and the nameplate.
Exactly. The Detroit Iron, big blocks and 4-speeds to now it's turbos and 4 cylinders. So
it's definitely it's taste, as you said before.
Yeah, exactly. That's the beautiful part about the car hobby is nothing is wrong. So it's you have a blank canvas and it's how you want to paint it, and the only person that needs to impress is you.
Let's talk about adjustable control arms on some applications. I know that they're out there for some certain applications. Is it something in the truck world?
Yeah. So adjustable, you're gonna, like we talked about earlier with kind of adjustment bolts and that, you're only going to be able to get so much adjustment on like your camber bolts. So a lot of times you'll see the control arms are adjustable as well. So they'll have like a, in the end, so if you look, kind of Andrew holds this control arm we have here, we have our bushings fixed to the end. On an adjustable control arm, that could be a Heim or something like a Johnny Joints, the example I'm going to use. But you can actually screw that in and out to get more adjustment. So I did a little project for Summit. We did a Silverado build, and I actually used this lift on there it was from this company called Icon Vehicle Dynamics.
Okay.
And they had these big, beautiful billet adjustable control arms, and the things were just absolutely awesome. But that was the cool part about that, is getting our suspension all dialed in, that we had all the adjustment in the world to get that stuff figured out. So in a crazy, when you start to lift your vehicle and it gets huge, and your adjustment becomes limited on wheel correction, that's an upper control arm, an adjustable upper control arm might be the answer.
Just had a question from an instructor. Can Heim joints be used on a road-driven vehicle? Is it a good idea?
It's a maintenance thing. So if you have a summer car, like we're up here in Ohio in the Rust Belt, and we spray a bunch of stuff on the roads to keep the roads clean. That stuff is going to affect a Heim joint severely more than, say, you live in Arizona, California, where it's dry and you're not getting that kind of stuff. But they actually sell outside like boots and covers and stuff to try to keep a Heim joint sealed up a little bit better, and it's more of a maintenance thing. Like and there's also different kinds of Heim joints. So you have there's steel on steel Heim joints. That is not for road use. Those are going to wear. That's a race car application kind of thing. But then they have like PTFE or Teflon lined Heim joints, and that's more of a road friendly application part. And just like anything, it's just important to pay attention to it. And if it needs replaced, to replace it over time, because a worn out Heim joint is going to fail just like a worn out ball joint.
Another student made a comment. How do you protect aluminum coilover shocks during the winter? What's your advice? Is there a secret brew that you?
So I'm a big when I drive, like I said, we live here in Ohio in the Rust Belt, so I'm a big fluid film guy. So I actually I fluid film everything I own. So it's kind of, I don't know how to describe it, except it looks like caramel is how it looks before you spray it. And they actually sell super slick kits where they sell you a gun and that kind of deal. And you can either do it in your driveway or rack the thing up, and you just spray it underneath. It's similar. You hear a lot of people talking about oil spraying. It's a similar process to oil spraying, but it's a superior chemical over just spraying used motor oil all over your vehicle. The stuff doesn't drip. It kind of sticks and adheres. But it's also important, if you have a brand new vehicle, to look at your vehicle's guidelines and kind of what comes along if your vehicle has a warranty, because There are some new frame coatings, like GM's coating, for example, that they actually want you to wait 2 years. It's 2 or 3 years. I'd like to say it's 2 before you spray something like fluid film on it, because it'll have some weird chemical reaction and it'll make all the stuff fall off apparently, and they say it voids your warranty. None of us want that. So yeah, fluid film is my secret chemical, and then when I put everything together, like I take a vehicle apart and put it back together, I never seize everything that can be never seized, because that's you always, it puts a little smile on your face when you're working on somebody's car and you go to take a brake rotor or something off and you pull a bolt out and you're like, oh, there's never seize on this. This guy thought about me. Like, so yeah, no, fluid film, or if you kind of want to spray some WD-40 on your kind of struts, just kind of give them a nice little hose down. That's going to keep some stuff off it. But it's important to wash your vehicle multiple times during the winter. Only washing it once or not washing it all and letting all that stuff sit on it is going to be bad for it. So, yeah, fluid film is my go-to to kind of for rust prevention and try to keep these things nice.
And it's like Cosmoline, but not as sticky.
Yeah, Cosmoline was the anti-rust chemical of our grandfather's time. Like, I can remember being a kid and there was a big cardboard tube and it had a wooden paintbrush in it. And it was just this nasty, goopy stuff, but man, does that stuff sure protects metal well.
But yeah, for coilovers, I mean, that's just a nightmare. The sleeves, the adjusting nut, and everything else.
Yeah, and if you have them from brand new and you're putting them together, throw some never sees. There's multiple different formulas between the silver and the copper and that kind of stuff. Kind of just pick the formula what's going to fit your application the best, because you don't, like you said, in this particular instance, it's an aluminum bodied coilover. Your steel bodied coilovers are a thing too. So kind of pick a anti-seize material for your adjustment nuts and your threads, and apply it before you put the things together, because that's the last thing you want is to go adjust the ride height on your vehicle and your nut be seized on there, because aluminum galded to steel or aluminum galded to aluminum is never fun. It's not a good time.
Another question just came in. Should you be using scales to set the corner weights for a car and also the ride height?
A set of corner weight scales is a very important tool. So not only does it tell you the weight balance on your car, but it lets you know how many pounds per corner. So it's an adjustment tool. Like I said, it's more of like if you're autocrossing the car, you're kind of using it for more of a race application.
And Ashley, could you pull up that picture of the scales? I think this is what the instructor is referring to.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, corner weight scales. So what those are going to tell you is you set those up onto your car. It links to that little monitor right there. And not only does it tell you your per corner weight, but it also tells you your weight bias. So if you're building something that's, a car that is a front engine car drives extremely different to a mid-engine or a rear engine car. And that's all has to do in kind of how with your suspension tuning and aid. And you can adjust your weight. You want a 50, in an ideal world, a 50-50 weight balance is perfect, and the thing is going to handle it's going to handle really different than, say, a car that's 70-30 or something that's 80-20.
Another question that just came in, when setting up the tow on a vehicle, should it be neutral, positive, or negative?
So I like to tow in vehicles. That's kind of the rule with a little bit of tow in, it's gonna get some steering correction. So in a perfect vehicle where nothing's wore out and it's all set up correctly, if it's got a slight tow in, the thing is gonna track down the road straight. It's gonna want to bring itself back to center. Now that's on a perfectly flat surface. If you've ever walked down a road, roads are crowned. So the vehicle's going to drive straight on a flat surface. Down a crowned road, it wants to come back to straight faster. So one of the examples I always like to use is like on airplanes. You see on like beginner aircraft, they have what they call a dihedral in the wing.
Yep.
Kind of the wings go up at a point like this, and that's just like toe in. It's simply to bring the thing back to straight. So but there is there's a fine line there. You don't want too much toe in, or else it affects how it steers into corners and tire wear.
Question from Steve here. Steve actually making a statement about we lowered a vehicle once. It was a Ford Taurus, and the issue was with the rear toe all of a sudden going out like this once we lowered it 1.5 inches. Yeah, rear suspensions, they change toe.
Yeah, that's with cars that have, it's not a straight axle vehicle in the back, you're going to get the same adjustment. And they actually sell, you can get adjustable toe links for a lot of applications. So that's something to look into, where you're actually gonna, it'll have like a turn, it'll almost look like a turnbuckle for, and that's the kind of deal, is you're going to lower the vehicle, you get adjustable toe links, and you adjust those to correct your toe.
And the nice thing about those is it's an investment in the vehicle, because, I mean, number one, it's going to save tire wear. Number two, it's going to make it a lot more adjustable down the road. I think that's a lot of the stuff that, when guys start pricing out the different options for a camber bolt versus a camber plate versus, a certain type of suspension arm, that looking at those options, and it's not just the immediate cost of it, it's what it's going to save you down the road.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, the upfront you can piece a kit together and do it little by little, but the upfront investment of a good quality kit that comes with everything is going to pay off in the long run. So I think generally if you can afford to spend the money and buy a whole kit and do it once and do it right the first time, you're going to have a lot more fun and a lot less headaches doing that, trying to, I put struts on my car first and then put in control arms. But it can be done that way. It's just you're going to get a lot more positive experience by doing it all at once.
Question from the audience. This one's awesome. Okay, 2017 Chrysler 300, and he's inquiring, he wants to lower the vehicle. What options are out there, and can he use some of the Dodge Charger parts?
Well, I will be the first to admit I am not a Mopar man.
Same here.
Yeah, it's I'm very partial to GM products. That is a ridiculously popular platform between the 300s, the Chargers, the Challengers. Like Dodge, they have a really cool aftermarket following. So I am 99% certain that some suspension kits exist out there for that car, because, like I said, you see those 300s. There's I was at Cars and Coffees not too long ago, and it's wild to see. There's a whole little group of Mopar guys that have 300s, Challengers, Chargers, and some of the customization with those guys goes absolutely well. Like, we always used to laugh when we were kids about, you'd go to a car show and they have the little crying baby dolls in front of the old, like that was the older generation, they were into that. I was walking around Cars and Coffee the other day, and I walked by and they have there's a whole Hulk car, and he has a little Hulk and the whole, I was giggling. It was such a good time. But anyway, just that there's got to be someone that makes a whole suspension kit out there for those cars that has everything you need for to bolt it all on. Now, as for inner parts changeability, I'm just not familiar enough with that platform to give you a definitive answer.
Best thing to probably do is go to summerracing.com and check the catalog, because it's really specific as far as what you're ordering and what's available for the vehicle. You can do it by make and model.
Yeah, we have something for everything you drive. So and we have, you get on our website and we have a cool little drop down bar, or you can even order a catalog right to your house. And when you get our big book is full of our most popular parts, and there's usually about something in there that'll fit anybody's ride.
Question just came in. What about airbag suspensions? Should you be worried about the alignment on those vehicles and where it is kept?
So that's so with airbags, like from a company like AccuAir or RideTech, you're gonna want to set it to where you're gonna drive it the most. So there is like a ride height setting in a lot of those airbag controllers and that kind of deal, and that's where you're gonna drive it. So that's where you're gonna want to set your camber and caster up. When you go to a show and you set the thing, drop frame and set the thing on the ground, you don't want to drive the car like that down the road, because not only is it unsafe, but you're going to get weird tire wear, the steering is going to be off, that kind of deal. So with an airbag deal, it's always going to be changing how much air is in the bag. So you're going to want to adjust your stuff to where you're going to drive it the most, and that's going to be at what we're going to call ride height.
Question just came in again. What about headlights in lowering a vehicle? Are there any laws, things you need to pay attention to with adjustment of the headlights?
Yeah, so you don't want to be that guy that gets flashed by high beams all the time. We've all been there. We've actually, when I did our Summit Jeep build, I drove the thing up to Detroit to debut it in the daytime, and I'd finished it the week before, but I'd never drove it outside. Like, it'd never been drove around at night. So, the shows, the Detroit Autorama is over, the show's over, it's dark outside. I go to pull the thing out of the, I think it's the Huntington Arena, I believe is what that's called, or center,
The
or
old
something
Kobo.
like that. Yeah, it's something like that. You can see Canada from there. Anyway, but I went to go drive down the thing at road, and I had people brighten me, shaking their hand at me, just being real mad. And then I realized, like, oh my gosh, my headlights aren't adjusted, and it's pointed directly in their windshield. And I felt really bad. I actually went back to my hotel room, and I had a couple tools with me, and I adjusted the headlights while I was up there so I could drive the thing home. But yeah, you're going to want to, as you lower your vehicle, where your headlight projection is going to change versus also lifting a vehicle. It's going to change where your headlights are. So, when I set my headlights, I have a big, nice, long concrete driveway at home and a big white garage door. So I like to, park the thing in the driveway and kind of adjust my headlights, make my beams nice and even. But yeah, you're going to want to pay attention to that in your headlight adjustment whenever you're changing ride height, because you don't want to be that guy that's brightening people all the time, because being able to see is great, but you want to be able to see everybody else to see too. So
Scott just left a comment. He says 2 words: GM Super Cruise on some of their SUVs. I know where you're coming from, because I know I've had that same problem. You're probably talking about the radar sensor on the front grille. People are lifting these, and it's changing the radar sensor for the mid-range and long-range radar. So, and it's also changing the stance a little bit. So instead of seeing a full backside of a truck, when you're coming up on something, it's just looking at the top. And when it starts coming in, it does a really sudden jerky movement. And yeah, you got to adjust the ADAS, the radar front sensors, and even probably some of the cameras depending on the vehicle.
yeah, and that's I know in some of the vehicles I've done for builds in Summit, a lot of them have backup sensors and that kind of deal, and it's important the position and correlation in those in the vehicle. So I've worked on a vehicle where they weren't quite clocked right, and the thing was just going absolutely bananas, telling me I'm going to hit something in the middle of an open parking lot. And I'm like, maybe this isn't right, and I need to change something. But that's important. That's also important when you're lifting and lowering a vehicle, especially with GMs and they have their StabiliTrak system. Is when you're changing all this stuff out of control arms and that, you might have to extend your ABS wires and that kind of deal, but you want to make sure that stuff's plugged in, or else it could really make your stuff wonky. But pay attention, not only when you're checking suspension components, to pay attention to your wheel bearings and that kind of, ABS sensors and that kind of stuff too, because that's all, like with StabiliTrak and like how you're talking about that other GM system, that stuff all works in correlation, and it's very important that it all works correctly.
Okay, question just came in. What about FMVSS 135 and also TUV approved kits for vehicles? Does it really make a difference?
So I'm gonna play a little bit on. I don't really have much knowledge on this subject. I hope you can highlight it a little more than I can.
FMVSS 135 is the stability control one. And basically, it's the weirdest test. I think SAE or SEMA just finished this up at their labs. So basically, it's a tuned piece of concrete that has a known coefficient of friction, and they put a robot behind the wheel. And the robot guns it, and then once it reaches a certain speed, it jerks the wheel one direction or the other, and it measures if it stays stable. So there are some kits that are FMVSS 135 certified, and there's even like roof racks for cars that are certified that they won't take it out of compliance, that it'll cause the car to roll at X number of speed with this amount of steering input. So there are solutions out there, but the tube thing, you'll see this like on a lot of like German springs and everything else. Don't ask me to speak German, because I know the tube thing is basically their Department of Transportation, and they go through and they certify for quality. knowing the manufacturer, a decent quality part that you're getting from them. As far as the application, I don't know what tube applies to the vehicle.
Yeah, that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse, and it's an important thing to note when lifting a vehicle. When you sit down and read the instructions for your lift kit, it's gonna in the first 2 pages, it's gonna tell you that this is gonna change the handling characteristics of your vehicle. So when lifting your vehicle, you need to be conscious of that. I have this giant truck with big tires. It's really high in the air. I can't go around an exit ramp at 80 miles an hour. It's going to be a bad time for somebody.
Yeah.
So that's if you're going to drive a big lifted vehicle, you need to be conscious that you are higher up in the air and that it's not a sports car. So you'll kind of notice that with a lot of the guys will get into some of these like hot rod trucks, that kind of, even some of the new pickup trucks are, some of that stuff, it's equipped from the factory with 400, 500 horsepower, and people like to drive them like they're Corvettes, and they're not Corvettes.
True. The thing that really concerns me sometimes is you look at these wheel and tire packages, and it's a 22-inch wheel. It's a pretty low-profile tire, and it's pretty heavy. Does that change some of in your opinion, the dynamics of the vehicle, the weight of the wheel?
100%. The more offset you put on a vehicle and a larger, heavier wheel, the more more strain you're gonna have on drivetrain components. So it's the theory of rotating mass. For every 1 pound of unsprung weight you add or take off, it's like putting 100 pounds on the chassis. So by adding more rotating mass, it's going to put more load on the whole thing. And then you see guys, have a really large, wide wheel, and they're doing what they call stretching tires, which is not safe for any of that kind. You want to use the proper tire for your proper size wheel. But, they do some, dangerous things, and that could, it affects how the vehicle handles. So not only can you roll a bead off a wheel, but it changes how it handles. So instead of having this nice little skinny tire, now you've changed the weight distribution over the whole tire, and now you've increased the likelihood of hydroplaning and some other kind of dangerous things because you've changed the pounds per square inch of the corner of the vehicle.
I call them brodozers.
Brodozers is one of my favorite terms.
Or pavement princesses.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, keep them coming in. We've got about another 3 minutes for this live stream. A question just came in. Okay, that's as far as a track setup. What are your recommendations for a setup on a car that may be used for a track day?
So I would like you want to put a large of wheel and tire packages you can comfortably fit under the wheel. The more traction you can put under a car, that's going to you're going to get more traction with a big wide tire, a 300 series tire, versus a little skinny guy. But sway bars and a strut pack, strut and spring package is going to make the world of difference in how a car handles. Whether you're on a track or autocrossing or just kind of like, you head down to Southern Ohio and go drive the triple nickel, and you're gonna have a lot better time with a performance suspension package with sway bars than you will driving a stock automobile. So, and for a track day car, you might need a harness bar, proper safety equipment. So that's something to look into. If actually we have our Summit Racing Project Tesla, we like to call it White Lightning, and that car is actually track spec'd out. So we has a harness bar in it for safety, of course. We have harnesses, but it has a spring package, sway bars, some adjustable suspension components to kind of correct our camber, caster, toe, that kind of deal. A really great set of wheels and tires on it. It's got a set of rivals on it, so the thing's it's sticky. It sticks to the road. But and then some more aggressive brake pads, and then some high temperature brake fluid as well, because you can go really fast, but being able to stop well is also extremely important.
That spring package on Tesla, I never thought about. You got the lower center of gravity with the batteries, and then you got a lower center of gravity with the suspension. That thing must handle great.
Oh, it's an absolute ball to drive. Actually, if you pop over to our Summit Racing YouTube channel, if you're curious, we did a small build series on our Tesla and kind of what we bolted on it. And So that was a lot of fun. It was cool to take a stock car and put some race parts on it and go have some fun. I'll take you for a ride sometime. It's a lot of fun.
Well, we've come to the end of an hour. Kind of have to wrap this up here because you guys got to get to your next class. Justin, anything you'd like to add?
No, like I said, like me and Andrew put out there earlier, when you're lifting or lowering your vehicle, do it how you want it because it's your canvas. So, the only person you're trying to impress is you. But other than that, man, thanks for having me. I always like coming to see you guys.
Thank you, Justin. And, my best piece of advice is check the reviews on a product on summitracing.com to get a feel, because sometimes you might even see a picture of someone who's using the same product.
Yeah, and if you ever have a question, feel free to reach out to our Summit Racing, our tech line, because those guys are on it. They're, I'll be the first to admit I even call it sometimes when I don't know.
Well, thank you, Justin.
Yep, and until next time, I'll see you guys later.
Thank you.